welcome to the show, Nathan, and we'll kick it off from now, shall we?
Yeah, mate. Thanks for having me, AZ. It's been an interesting time of late, obviously, with all the COVID challenges, and I guess it's given everyone a bit of time to reflect on where they're at, where they're going, and we've definitely been doing that, not only personally but also with our business. So hopefully I can share some knowledge today and help some people out.
Well, I'm sure you'll do that. So I guess just to take it all the way back, how did you first get into the tennis scene?
Oh, look, mate, it was probably more my wife Giselle, who you know very well. It was more her, I guess, one of the goals that she'd had to work on the tour as a trainer, and she's the kind of person that once she's got a taste or a hunger for something, she just won't let up until it comes into play. So she just started out approaching different people and didn't really eventuate. She was a trainer. We both were trainers at the time. And then she actually got a gig at the Sydney Olympics in 2000 as a massage therapist, because we're both massage therapists as well. And the sport that she requested was tennis. And through there, she met a player, Arantxa Sanchez Vicario, who was probably top 5 in the world at the time. And Arantxa took a liking to her as a therapist and a trainer, and basically, just everything just happened from there. Giselle started traveling with her, and then got to the point with our relationship where Giselle was probably going to stop because we just weren't seeing each other. She was traveling around the world and I was still based in Sydney. And then I got an opportunity to go and work in a club that Arantxa actually had ownership in. So I went over there and was the physical director there for 2 years and helped set up a lot of protocols and systems for the tennis players there. And then from there, I just, being the person I am, loving people and loving connecting with people, I just met a lot of people. And from there, I picked up players to travel with. And pretty much from that time, we spent about 6 years on the tour. So I left the academy and we spent 6 years traveling on the tour, working with various players, mainly female players initially. And we're talking sort of players, in the top 10 down to the top 100 in the world. And then we ended up finishing our time up doing that because we wanted to settle down and build a base in Australia. So we ended up moving back home to Australia.
What year was those when you were on the tour? Like late 90s, early 2000s?
Yeah, early 2000s. So after the Olympics, Giselle kicked off, and then I think I was over there early 2000. And yeah, we ended up doing that, I think, till 2006. So we moved back home.
So what was the S&C trainer scene like back then? Did most players have a trainer? Were you guys kind of a rarity in the scene, or how was that? How were you guys even perceived back then?
Oh, look, mate, to be honest with you, I was only thinking the other day, like back in the late 90s, PT, personal training, and definitely sports-based training really wasn't a full-time occupation. You do it sort of before you went to work, and then when you finish work, you'd go and pump a couple of sessions out as well. And you obviously had, your rugby league clubs and that sort of thing, who had full-time S&C trainers there. But the general, I guess, trainer, it was like a part-time gig. So I was really excited to go over and think, well, I can do this full-time. But when we got there in Spain, they were quite a few years behind, I think, where we were in Australia. So I did quite a bit of study around, obviously, I'd worked in and out of sports a lot prior to that, but I did quite a bit of research into tennis because I hadn't had much of a background in it prior to that. And then basically when I got there, they weren't really doing any formal warm-up or any recovery protocols. There was nothing in place. So that was my first goal, was just to get those areas set up and then just systemize the training from there. We'd have upwards of, 300 kids a week that we would have to facilitate, set up programming for them in large groups. So that was quite challenging, trying to sort of get as much bang out of for your buck as you can with large groups of players. And as you know, having your background in rugby league, it can be challenging having 20 to 30 players and trying to run them through sessions. But yeah, we got our heads around it. Then I had a good team of some Spanish trainers there as well under me. But yeah, look, it was good that when I got there, we had 3 full-time trainers and myself. And by the time I left, we had 5 full-time trainers and myself. And I learnt, mate, it was probably one of the biggest growth periods of my career actually there, because I had to learn on my feet, had to learn about the sport, but also had to learn how to manage large groups of players. And, a lot of them were real high-end young junior players as well.
That's cool. Any language barriers that you guys had to face, or could you use English most of the time?
It was actually funny because a lot of friends who would come over and spend time with me, they go, mate, I can't believe how good your Spanish is. But I always called it survival Spanish. If you drop me anywhere in Spain, I'd get by. But I definitely couldn't get up and give a lecture on anything, that was for sure. And I started lessons, and it was just too time consuming. By the time I'd do a couple of lessons a week and then go home and practice, and I thought I just needed to learn what I needed for work, which was just counting, obviously terminology in and around what I needed to teach. And I picked that up really quickly because I was using it all the time. And basically a lot of the kids, we had probably 40% of the kids were Spanish and the rest were international. So bulk of them for other parts of Europe. And everyone just wanted to learn English. And because, when you come from Australia, people think our English isn't really English. They find it hard to understand our accent. So they just love being around me, these players, and they just kept saying to me, speak English, don't speak Spanish to us. And English was probably the most spoken language in the academy because we had so many other players from other countries as well. So yeah, no, it was good. I still love speaking a little bit at times when I meet someone that speaks a bit of Spanish. But I think it's like anything, you just find a way to get through it. Sometimes you might have had an Asian person there and a family that they didn't speak a lick of English. They spoke a bit of Spanish, and that was challenging, but it was fun at the same time. Always just have a laugh and end up working out how to get through it.
Was that model, I guess that development program modelled off the Florida one? Is it the IMG Academy?
Yeah, so the IMG Academy, that started out like as Nick Bollettieri, that was his academy there. And IMG, I think, from what I can gather, sort of bought him out or brought the two together. It's a very similar model. So the club we were at was called Sanchez Gasol Academy. And there's one in Barcelona, and there's now, I think, an even bigger one in Florida. So that east coast of the USA, it's like the real tennis development hub of probably the world. So they've all sort of got a lot of clubs through there. I just think the weather, and it's just obviously the history of the game. There's been a lot of good players that have come through there. I'd say it's probably more weather though. It's sort of, we actually lived, Giselle and I lived in Florida. Giselle was, I were working with Martina Navratilova for a couple of years, and we actually lived with her in Florida for 2 years. And yeah, like the weather's very similar to where we are now on the Sunshine Coast. Like we got winter here now, but it's still, 19, 20 degrees. So I think players are attracted to that, the fact that they can train all year. And when we're in Spain, for example, it'd get really cold there in winter. So it'd sort of get down to around 5 degrees sometimes. And it was so hard on the kids to get them on court and get them motivated to train.
Okay. How did when you guys were on tour or working full time, how was your structure, I guess, throughout the whole training calendar? Were you with the player the whole time for the whole year, or would you just hang out with them for 2 weeks prior to a tournament?
Everyone's a little bit different in regards to that, but the bulk of the time you spend, mate, pretty much every waking minute with the player, but besides when they're on court. and it can get to the point where it's probably not healthy. And look, everyone has their, you have your moments away from each other, but when you think about the role of a trainer on the tennis tour is, you most of the time the players want to have breakfast with you because they like having people around because it's such an individual sport. They want their team around them a lot of the time. So they'll either have their trainer, their coach, and their family or friends, and sometimes you're all there together if it's a big match. And then pretty much after that, you might go up to the room, help them prepare some things. You jump in transport, you'll get to the tournament, and then you get to the tournament, they'll get themselves dressed, and you'll warm them up. They'll jump on court and practice. You're there. You get them off court. You do any recovery protocols. They'll go have a shower. You'll get them something to eat. You'll sit with them while they eat most of the time. And then there'll be a bit of fluffing around waiting for a match, which could be, depending on the matches before it or any rain delays, it could be a couple of hours. Generally through that time, you're sort of taking notes, getting things ready, preparing, any of their, their drinks or their food for when they play. They'd play a match. You'd warm them up before the match. They'd come off. You'd cool them down. You'd go back. You'd stick them in an ice bath, either at the hotel or if they had the facilities at the courts. And then you would, Giselle and I would massage them, and then there's dinner as well. So when you go through a daily process like that, it's quite detailed, it's quite extensive. With these players, you can't drop the ball, like you can't forget anything. That for them could be the difference from them winning or losing a match. That's their mindset, most of them. And I think that's how Giselle and I lasted so long on the tour. We were super organised, always very proactive with our thinking, to the point where, particularly like when I was travelling with Lleyton Hewitt, I would ring up what hotels are we staying at next. I would research the hotel. I'd get some kind of idea on what the gym facility was like, what parks were around, what food was available for breakfast. Was it buffet? Could I have the capability to be able to prepare his like oatmeal and those sorts of things? And when you'd get there and the player would go, oh yes, we've got some information here for Mr. Martin, he requested. The player goes, mate, this guy's on it. Like, they know what they're doing, and that instills that strengthens up their backbone. It gives them a lot of confidence in their team, which gives them confidence in themselves. And that's, we found that, super important. But pretty much, mate, you'd spend a large bulk of your time with the players, and you sort of, to a degree, and it's all there are a lot of individual characteristics around it as well, but most of the time you'd spend a big bulk of the day with the players, and you're almost at their beck and call, because you got to manage their bodies and you've got to keep them hydrated and fueled and those sorts of things. So it's there's a bit of stress involved, but also a truckload of planning and thinking too.
How were their training loads managed, or how was it even prescribed within a tournament week? Because I know they have practice sessions, they have training sessions. How does that kind of impact, or how does that look on a tournament week or a tournament schedule?
Well, mate, as you know, when you helped us pull the tennis high performance strength and conditioning program together, and we were sort of running you through, like, one thing that you did really well was you said, what's the ideal player look like? What do you need them to be able to do? That sort of triggered some, really powerful things for us, because when we started thinking around, because when you work back from that, you start realizing what they need to do, why they need to do it. And you basically can put everything in place. And I think one thing that you sort of realized during that time was like, wow, like, how do you periodize for these guys? Like, they're playing tournaments every week. They have literally, like, this is at the high end. So say like a Roger Federer, he might have, well, now he's older, but when he was in his prime, he might have had maybe 6 to 8 weeks off through the whole year. So you imagine competing, 40, 45 weeks a year in any sport, and someone like himself, every week he's pretty much making a semi-final or a final. So he would finish a tournament on a Sunday, he'd get in the plane Sunday night, and he might have to play his next match Tuesday at a different country, different venue, different hotel. So really, like the training side of things, sometimes we want it up here, but it actually gets scaled so low down. You're basically just in recovery and preparation mode the whole time. Now, if we take players out of season, so in off season, so I did 10 pre-seasons with Lleyton Hewitt, and Lleyton was awesome with it, because he'd always try to get as long as he could out of them. So we'd have sometimes 10 to 12 weeks for a pre-season. So we'd have 2 weeks of just doing like cross training, heaps of boxing, lots of stuff on the beach. It was all challenging, but it was all just totally nothing specific for tennis. And then we would just start to break it down from there. And once he got back on court, everything would get a lot more specific. During the year with someone like Lleyton, he even didn't like doing a lot of work in and around tournaments. So what I highlighted to him was, these are the areas we know are more orientated around your weaknesses. So let's just focus on those in your tournaments, where most players want to focus on their strengths because it makes them feel good. They get more confident. So someone like Lleyton, who was a good mover, but I don't think his strength base was as good as it could have been. As soon as we'd get a chance, we'd do like a little strength phase, even if that meant, even just maintaining what he had. And then when we'd get maybe a couple of weeks, we would go, okay, let's do some lifting twice a week, and then we'll do some work on some other things we need to work on in and around that. It's really probably the biggest challenge working with tennis players, is trying to get them physically where they need to be, and taking into consideration that they're playing almost every week. It's super challenging, and it's so slow sometimes, the progress.
Yeah, I can only imagine. What have been some of your biggest takeaways from working on the tour to, how you run your business and the way you train people now?
Look, personally, some of the biggest takeaways have been, I've learnt a lot from all my experiences, and from every player, like sort of high-end player, you tend to learn more from them than sort of like players that are sort of middle of the pack. Because the high-end players, they generally get there for a reason. Sometimes it can be sort of one thing that's really dominant about their personality, or even about their playing style, or about their physicality, and it's just so dominant that it's just found a way to get them to the top. There's a lot of things that I gained and subconsciously learnt from working with Lleyton. And at the time, I think it was more for us, they just sort of evolved organically between us. I think there was things that not necessarily he taught me or I taught him. I think we just sort of meshed and realised them together. And it's not now that since he's been retired for a few years, that when I have a chat to him about it, he's like, yeah, that's true. Like that's what I feel. And basically what I got from him was, and at least these are all real simple common things that most, high-end athletes realise and strive for as well. But it's just finding a way, like always being focused on your goal. And I think a lot of people go away from that. If you focus on your goal, then everything else sort of doesn't matter what people say, what people do, even what happens to you. If you still just stay almost fixated on that, evidently most of the time you're going to get there. Where when we get distracted from that, we end up getting pushed around, and we end up going, away from that. And Lleyton was always great with that. He'd always, one of our favourite sayings was just find a way, and I would expose him to some hard sessions, and I'd say, mate, we've just got to find a way to get through this. And that's something that's I apply to myself daily, and also into our business as well. Like, if something can't be done or it hasn't been done, doesn't mean it can't be. It just means we've got to find a way to make it happen. And I think just keeping things simple. And the older I'm getting and the longer I'm staying in this business, the more I've realized that simplicity, I think, just rules, and consistency. You know, even with when we look at strength training or, you know, other disciplines of training, just keeping things simple, starting off simply and building from there, and then just doing them consistently. I think a lot of trainers and players, they see things on social media and they think that's the way to go. And you know, people need a plan, and they need a simple plan, and they just need to do it consistently. They might get slightly better results doing things more extravagantly, but you know, most of the time, from my experience, they're going to get there doing them simply and consistently, and you know, just doing them every day.
So when you guys were traveling on tour, what were, I guess, some of the biggest struggles that you and Giselle faced during it?
Oh, mate, there was a few, and you know, I never really got homesick because I was at the time when I started, I was in my mid-20s, and I just loved it. You could imagine, you know, being that age and just getting paid to travel around the world, staying in nice hotels. And it's funny now because when we get a lot of coaches and trainers approach us about trying to get in on the tour, at the end of our careers, sort of traveling full time, that was one thing that really the gloss got robbed off it. Like, it's like you just get used to eating in restaurants and eating good food and staying in nice hotels, and then you start to realize what's important to you, which is family and connection. And when you're traveling on the road, it's hard to get to have those things. You're connected to sometimes an environment that can be quite toxic, being the tennis world, because it's so much competition, there's so much travel. It can start to become a bit of a drain. So the travel was challenging. Probably just being with the same people all the time would be quite challenging for myself personally. And probably the biggest struggle that I found I had in the end was just being able to have the freedom to do things that I wanted to do, rather than sort of being dictated by what the job at hand is. Because like I said before, it's quite an extensive role, and sometimes you could go for 3 or 4 days and not feel like you've had any time to do anything on your own, and that sort of wears you down a little bit.
So you guys finished the tour, say, around 2007, 2008. A lot of coaches, I would probably imagine, when they've left the tour, they probably don't kind of carry on the tennis scene as much as what they did. But for you guys, that's kind of when I met you, I've kind of felt like you guys did a heap more tennis stuff with different types of athletes, with a whole range of males and females when you were back in Sydney. Like, how did that kind of organically come about, and how was that looking, and how did that kind of fit into your life during those periods?
Yeah, well, when we stopped sort of traveling full time, we moved back to Sydney. We set ourselves up, and I actually when I moved back, originally got back into massage full time because I just wanted to have a break, and I wanted to hone my skills a bit more around that space. So I did that full time for a year, and I ended up building up a business where I was doing sort of 30 to 40 massages a week. And then that anyone who's listening to this, who's a therapist or been a therapist, will know that's a lot of hands-on sort of sport-specific deep tissue massage work. So then Giselle and I jumped back into, just started out just personal training, and slowly over time, we had players who would approach us, "Oh, you guys are back in Australia now," or, you know, some parents, etc. And we started to think, I think we can actually make this work from Sydney. We can start to try and maybe promote ourselves a bit more in the tennis space in Australia. And then we just started looking at different business models we could set up to facilitate that a little bit better. And then over time, it's just been a process of, you know, working out what works best, what can we build leverage off, and, you know, what's the most effective way to you know, do what we love doing, which is training athletes, and still have the lifestyle that we want. So initially it was, we didn't really have a plan for it. It just sort of evolved initially. And then we said, you know, we need to goal orientate this a little bit. So we got a bit of direction, and that's what we did. And yeah, it just sort of just started to happen naturally when we put that plan in place.
So you guys were essentially just training each athlete for like a mini camp before a tournament, and then they would go off and do the tournament and then come back to you, or just when they were only based in Australia? How did that look?
So Giselle and I were still traveling with players. So we would do maybe like a 2 or 3 week training block with some players on the tour. So we jumped back into Fitness First. That's where we're working out of. That's where we met yourself, and a lot of other awesome trainers were working out of that Platinum Club. Some of the best trainers I've actually ever come across went through that place. And so, you know, it was good because we were exposed all of a sudden to a lot of other great trainers who had their own niches. And we actually love being in that space. You know, we learned a heaps of stuff from you and guys like Aaron McKenzie and Dave Driscoll, and we would sort of travel a little bit, come back. And then as well as doing that, we would have players that would come and see us once or twice a week that live locally, or maybe, you know, not too far away. And they would come and see us and train with us weekly, more younger players. So then we started to think, you know, we're traveling on the tour and that's great, but maybe we should focus more on junior development. So we sort of had to educate ourselves in and around that space a bit more. And once we got our heads around that, we just started to pick up more and more work from, you know, developing players and coaches saying, look, we've got a group of young kids. Can you look at, you know, helping them out? So we just set up some testing protocols and then some programming systems, and we just went from there. So then we pretty much stopped traveling after about 3 years of doing that. And then pretty much I'll just be training Lleyton Hewitt, just doing his pre-seasons. And Giselle wasn't doing any traveling at all as well, because, you know, we started having kids and things just started to change for us personally. And that's sort of how it all happened. Just sort of flowed from coming back to Australia, jumping back into the gym, then slowly just building up our PT business. And then it started to get more tennis sport specific. And then we started to do less travel on the tour. And when we got to the point, we just sort of had our niche market of tennis athletes that we could, you know, pretty much just look after from where we were. And that's really, it happens, not saying that, you know, we're some of the best tennis trainers in the world, but you find when you've done something for a long time and there's traveling involved and it impacts your lifestyle quite dramatically, it's hard to do that for a decade. And particularly when you get good at it, you realize, I can just base myself somewhere and people can come to me. And that's what happens with a lot of good coaches. It's funny because on the tennis tour, I don't think that there are the best coaches in the world. I don't think out of the top 100 players, I don't think they're the top 100 coaches in the world. I think there's a lot of fantastic coaches that would be some of the best in the world, working in clubs or working in their own club, because they don't need to travel. And it's the same with trainers. You know, we saw some stuff on tour and we're like, holy smoke, this person's going to kill that person, or whatever the case. But they were there because maybe they didn't charge much, or they just were in the right place at the right time. So we just realised that we could base ourselves in Sydney and build something up from there that was going to be sustainable and give us what we wanted.
Yeah, no, I totally agree and kind of see you on that. It's been one of the reasons, I guess, why I'm doing what I'm doing now. Coming from a reasonably demanding industry, did have impacts on my young family and myself and my wife. And I guess trying to make those changes that kind of best suit the lifestyle and your goals once you have kids, it's definitely
100%.
Can be life-changing. And I think too, from the outside, a lot of people just look at the professional sporting world and just think it's the be-all and end-all. Like, why would you want to leave that? And you're so right in terms of even though that coach may be at the peak of the sport, that doesn't mean that they're the peak of the trainers. They could just be the
No.
ones that were prepared to not be around their family for 8 months of the year. They could be on their second marriage. There's a huge amount
Yeah.
of sacrifices
Yes.
that I saw that kind of impacted me in a way that I felt like I wasn't prepared to make those anymore.
But mate, you're right, because one thing that I think I've done well personally is first of all, I was lucky. I had great mentors, personal mentors, not sort of in the training space. And as I sort of realised how much I gained from them. So then, as I've got older, I've always tried to look at people who have gone before me, who have been successful or unsuccessful, because obviously going to learn just as much from both. And I just think, Nathan, you'd be an idiot if you didn't follow that person and what they've achieved. What was their plan? How did it evolve? How did it work? And whether it's structured or unstructured, but finding out, information from that person, it's huge, because you save yourself so much trauma. And like you just said, like you realized yourself that being in and around a space that you thought, well, was great, I've got what I needed out of it, but long term, it's probably, I probably don't want to end up like that. And we got to that point as well. And that was one thing I was like, I don't want to end up, being 40 or 45 and not having kids, and just being someone that travels around on the tennis tour, because that's not what I was about. Some people that is, and that's fine, but it wasn't sort of the direction I wanted to go.
Yeah, so true. I used to always kind of think, am I doing this because of the affirmation I get from my peers of being in this kind of group, or am I doing it because I generally want to be there and make the sacrifices to be there?
Yeah, 100%. And that sacrifice is the big word, because the higher in the sport, the more money that's involved, etc., the more sacrifice the team and the staff have to make as well. A lot of times you go home and you're spending hours and hours doing things that you're probably thinking, I'm not actually getting paid for this, but I need to do it to get better, or to help out, the situation.
Yeah, so true. So when you used to look at an athlete, or in particular a tennis athlete, what key attributes would you try and look to develop within that person?
I think a lot of it, at the time, when we first started out, we probably treated most players generally. So we treated them like we'd treat them quite similar in a way where we'd go, okay, every tennis player should sort of train like this. And then as we got a bit more experience, we started realizing, obviously you work out players' strengths and weaknesses, and you go, oh, hang on, we can see this going on court, and that sort of matches up with what we're finding with them off court. Maybe we should do some work around it. And then we started to get a lot more specific. So to answer your question, to come down more to the individual needs of each player. And, generally though, most players want to move better on court. They want to have better endurance. But they think that just doing agility drills and doing endurance training or conditioning training is going to massively impact that. And once we sort of educate them around the whole picture, and particularly like getting their strength better, and getting them to understand that this is going to impact your endurance, it's going to impact your movement capabilities. They've got a lot more buy-in to, want to, I guess, do that sort of training more. A lot of players, initially when we started traveling on the tour, were doing like a lot of like stuff on the treadmill, stuff on the bikes, which is good. It's good for them to do some off-feet conditioning and those sorts of things because of the wear and tear on their joints, etc. But they were doing it more for almost like they thought it was sport specificity. So it's crazy how different all these players at that high end train, because you think you've got players coming from Uzbekistan, you've got players coming from Asia, and and the training systems over there that they've come through are totally different. Where now, obviously, the internet's gone full tilt, and there's so many different courses and things people can do online. Everything's sort of starting to sort of become a bit more narrow. Everyone's doing very similar things, and this is just from what we see on Instagram and from the network that we're in of tennis trainers. We're all sort of doing things quite similar and targeting similar areas for players. So the main areas that if we had to pick sort of a couple of key areas that we would work on for most players, it'd be flexibility and mobility. So joint range, and then just, the muscle length range, and then it'd be their strength. And we find that we normally start, particularly younger players, we start them off with that as a base. So if we had like a protocol, so to speak, it would be flexibility, mobility, and strength. We're going to work on those. And we find that when we do that, we normally get feedback like, I'm moving so much better on court, my balance is better, I feel so much more stable, I'm hitting my serve with more power, I'm getting into better positions on court. Whereas if we just targeted their movement, we'd only get such a small gain, because they wouldn't be, utilising what they could have once we improve the mobility, flexibility, and strength. And a lot of other trainers with younger athletes, they'll focus more on coordination. So we have players even who are, 8 years old, we'll still get them doing some kind of strength-based training, whether it's isometric work or just body weight training, but, challenging them still, where a lot of other trainers are doing more coordination. And that's our approach, is just slightly different in regards to that.
Was it a hard sell initially trying to get tennis players under the bar and trying to get them exposed to load?
Yeah, so say someone like Lleyton, by the time I got him, he was 25, 26, and his body, he'd developed, I don't know, what do you call it? He was quite bound up, particularly like through his hips, lower back. So we'd do quite a bit of mobility work. He didn't like stretching. He didn't like stretching at all, but he found when he stretched, he felt he was more prone to injury, which I've come across quite a few times. And, now I'm working with his son. His son's 12, and his son's like a little freak. He's going to be a great player like his dad. And now I've got the ability with Cruz to be able to go, okay, strength, mobility, flexibility, and we've developed a plan for him. So he's been following that for about a year. So hopefully by the time he gets to 25, his range is better, his strength's better, and he can start getting underneath the bar. Lleyton, I never even tried to get him barbell squatting. He just didn't respond well to it. And I would have had to spend, I would have had to dedicate a lot of time to getting his body in a position where we could do that. And I felt that it would have drawn too much time away. I would have lost early on. I would have lost the buy-in from him. He would have been, this stuff shit. I'm not doing this. Like, this is boring. It's not doing anything and I don't enjoy it. So slowly over time, he always loved doing his strength training, but over time, the strength training evolved to become a lot more functional, rather than just sort of your bicep curls and your tricep extensions and those sorts of things. And as his ranges improved, then we started doing a little bit more complex training, where, younger players we get through coming now, we can get them sort of learning some basic, Olympic lifting techniques when they're young, and get, because the mobility and the ranges is there and the stability is there, and we can start to encourage that more. Not many high-end players would let you barbell back squat them. A lot of them will use like a trap bar. They won't do a lot of heavy lifting. And it's funny because it's the same with the English Premier League. I've heard quite a few times that trainers will go in there and think, I've got this background in Olympic lifting, and it's super effective. And they get there and the club's like, mate, you can't get Ronaldo, you know, doing 1RM back squats. There's just no chance. Like, if it's too high risk of him injuring himself. So the education isn't there. But I'm hoping things have changed across the board with those, with you know, with the soccer. And I know that with tennis coming through, a lot of the younger guys and girls coming through now are exposed to, you know, the right kind of lifting protocols at younger ages. So by the time they're in their early 20s, they're doing all those things. But back in my time, it just wasn't really happening. It was more, you could still load them up, but it was real, you know, just like split squats and nothing sort of barbell orientated.
Cool. So looking back, what was, I guess, some of your, or an example of like a really big mistake you've made in your programming or just in your training methods, and then it kind of just changed the way you program from that point on?
I think, like I touched on before, probably being a little bit too general. Initially treating every player the same. So what we ended up doing was, you know, coming up with some testing protocols or assessment protocols. And then from there, it's just sort of building the program from there. One thing that you helped us set up, which was super effective, was like, you know, working out what's the ideal athlete look like, feel like, how do we want them to perform and recover. And then I guess we came up with our 9 threads through that. So, you know, with the younger players, we would typically try to get them to follow in a given week. We'd try to get them to touch on each of the threads with a focus on the threads that are high priority for them. And that goes the same for, you know, a high-end player as well. It's no different for them. Their threads would just be slightly different. So we try and touch on all of them because, you know, we know that they're the 9 threads that are going to produce the ideal athlete. And then we'll just go, okay, out of the 9, these are our 3 high priority. How are we going to structure those so that we're targeting them? And then the other 6, how are we going to get them still into their weekly plan so that they're still working on those areas as well? And setting that up was, that was really important for us because that sort of just completed our methodology. And, you know, one thing that, you know, you sort of are always like, and I know it's you really utilize this with your training practices as well, is you always need to know why. If you know why you're doing something, then, you know, you always got something to fall back on, where if you're just throwing something in because it looks good, you know, what is it going to have a positive or a negative effect, where it makes you think more about your programming. So I'd say probably those 2 areas, treating people more individually and always asking myself why I was doing this. I think early on I got caught up with the whole, oh, that person's doing a backflip on a Bosu holding a dumbbell. It looks really cool. I'm going to do it with it. And then add someone throwing a tennis ball at me as well. Where, like I said before, keeping it simple and doing it consistently and knowing why you're doing it, and then how that falls into our threads, is super powerful for us.
Cool. Are you able to disclose what those 9 threads are at all? Can you remember them?
Yeah, I always forget a couple. I always need to get them in front of me. But so we've got total body flexibility. We've got bilateral strength. We've got unilateral power, multi-directional movement. What have I forget what I've said now? Like a high aerobic capacity. I can't remember the rest off the top of my head.
No, that's cool. I can put those in the show notes if we need to. That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point making there about those threads. Like, if you can break down the demands of the sport and then break down the demands of how you train and then associate specific threads, and then off those threads create specific exercises, then it makes your programming really easy. And that's kind of a lot of the things advice I give to coaches when it comes to just any sport they work in, is if you know the sport and if you know your threads, you pretty much can make your program can just flow off that
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. So normally what I'll do is I've got like a little chart, which I probably shouldn't use because I basically have it on my computer and I'll look at it and I've got all my threads there. And then out of the threads, it's sort of obviously you can categorize each thread as well. So like aerobic, you know, high aerobic capacity can be broken down into different categories. So I think the fact that I have that there and I look at it all the time, it's like when I started out and I used to handwrite all my programs and I never used to forget everything. But now, as soon as I started using screens and tablets, it's like I need that. Otherwise, I think, all right, I forget what I put in that email 5 minutes ago, which is obviously what's just happened to me now. I can't even remember the threads off the top of my head without looking at my screen.
Put you on the spot. I guess when you create a threads, your exercise list just like it just grows massively. So obviously,
yeah,
it's going to be harder to remember all those. So I'll let you off this once.
Yeah, and look, I think having like a simple system like that in place, you just always know, like it's almost like your spine of what you do as a trainer. Like you just know these are the training disciplines we're focusing on, and these are the reasons why. And you know, as soon as someone asks you why that, you go, okay, because of X, Y, and Z. It's just a simple way to approach it that's super effective.
Cool. So just a little segue now, we're just going to focus on some of the business things that you and Giselle have done. Did you guys always run a business when you were on the tour?
No, we didn't. No. So when we were on the tour, it was just basically just contracted to a player and that was it. There was nothing else involved aside from that.
Yeah, that's cool. So how does what's your current business structure like today?
So things have evolved quite dramatically, actually. We don't do much face-to-face training now. I think I might do about 6 or 7 sessions a week. So we relocated to the Sunshine Coast from Sydney just to change our lifestyle. We've got 2 young kids, and obviously, you know, it's a lot more affordable up here, housing, etc. And it just freed us up to be able to live a better lifestyle, spend more time with our family, but also we felt as trainers, as you know, I'm 45 now, that we can start to go off and sort of structure the business differently, which is what we did. So been up here for 3.5 years, but 7 years ago, while we're still down in Sydney, we started to, and this was Giselle's passion at the time, was to start to flick things over online. So we set up a website. We created, we'd been writing for the Australian Tennis Magazine for about 5 or 6 years at the time, and we had all this content that they'd sort of put together, you know, it looked really cool, and we ended up just using all that and put together like our first sort of PDF program. And we started selling that online, and there was only one other person in the world that was doing that in our space at the time. And from there, mate, things have just evolved. So we've done that the last 7 years. We've built up our programs. We think that they're awesome. We obviously did one with yourself as well. And from that, everything just started to grow. So now we're not only do we sell sort of our online, I guess we call them like an online generic program, because it's just like a evergreen product that someone will just purchase. They'll follow it in their own time, and they have no contact with us. That's sort of like our base introduction to us as trainers, and then from there, people can also train with us specifically. So we'll, you know, have a Zoom meeting, get them to fill out some online forms, put together a plan, present the plan to them in regards to, you know, their training. So we look at things like how much they can train, what training are they doing, what have they done before. So we look at, you know, age of the player, their training experience, what their goals are, what their time capabilities are. And we just basically pull the program together, and we use software called visual coaching. And basically the people, it's almost like they just follow an app, and we catch up with them every 5 weeks and take them through that. And that's sort of like our high-end product. So we got the introductory sort of online programs. Then we've got we call that the Tennis Fitness Academy. And we do something similar to that as well, where we'll just get people to buy like a 10 or 20 week program block with us. And we will set up a 10 or 20 week training block for that person. And we just have contact with them as they go through that as well. And, I think, like yourself, building your online business and your online presence, the learning curve's quite steep and it's super exciting, and you realize how much opportunity there is. Sometimes it gets too much. You're like, I want to do this and I want to do that. But I've always just go back to the whole keep it simple and keep it consistent. And we've found that we've built slowly, but a lot of people have come and gone, and our business is we find that its spine is like super strong. We like to give away a lot of free content. We always personally write back to everybody. We're pretty diligent with trying to be as, support based as we can. And now we've found that, every day we're getting, up to a dozen emails from people like, can you help me with this? Can you help with that? Or do you want to look at this business idea? And that's just because we've been in the space for a while, but we feel we've just done things right. We've done things ethically, and we've been fair with our pricing and that sort of stuff as well.
How did you guys build your social media following? Because you guys got quite a big one. Was that already in place prior, just through the work you've done with the players? Or have you guys been, I guess, quite aggressive over the last 6 years in building that up?
We've got probably more of a focus on it at the moment than we used to. Like, we only started Instagram. I think we had our Instagram account, but I think we only just maybe 3 years ago. But I think it's really only been the last 8 months to a year where we've sort of been posting on it once a day, where I think a lot of other people are smashing it three to 6 times a day. But we just keep it simple, and we've got a bit of a plan that we follow in regards to that. And the same with Facebook. We've been going a lot longer. I think we're up around about 35,000 on that. And we get massive engagement on Facebook because it's something that we've been using longer, but we just feel like we know what works a bit better with it. Like, we could get, 300 shares on a post, and we try to put content on that we know just through trial and error that people want to see. And we try not to put stuff on there that looks good, but people go, it looks great, but I'm not really going to be able to use it. And it's that fine line of what looks good and what's applicable for the general sort of tennis community as well. And I think there's a lot of power in that. Like, it's sort of taking yourself away from what I think's going to work and what actually does work is a big difference, because you've got to get out of your own head and your own space as a trainer and or a coach, and go, okay, really what do people want to see and what's going to be effective for them. And I think that's where we've got quite a bit of momentum. Is it's simple, it's applicable, and people can just have a go at like the exercises we throw up there. And we put lots of free information on our blogs and free program giveaways and those sorts of things. But mate, freaking social media, it's always evolving, and I think it evolves too quickly, like it's now there's TikTok and all these other things. And we do have a TikTok account, but it's having the time to be able to, structure them all, because they're all quite uniquely different as well. We find Facebook works really well in regards to the older demographic. So for us, it's great because we're getting parents and coaches, and Instagram's more sort of younger, the younger demographic, and then TikTok's even underneath that. So, we love Facebook. We find that's a really good platform for us to use.
Cool. What were some of your biggest mistakes against going through your business journey that you would, if you're going back, you wouldn't have done them?
I think dropping your ego enough to get constructive criticism back from people, or when, by no means are all the emails we receive super positive. You know, you can't please everyone all the time, and sometimes things just don't work for people. And we understand that, where initially probably wasn't the case as much. It's like, oh, you know, I've created this and I know it works, so it should work for you. There's something wrong with you. And having more of a headspace where I can understand that, like I can see how that could happen, and let's try and sort of work through it together and make our products better. So probably just initially having our support system a bit differently, where now we're a lot more open to creating changes that are going to work well for people, rather than just being, you know, fixated on, no, this is what we think works and that's what we're going to stick with. So that's been really good. And mate, we're always asking people like for testimonials, and we're being a lot bolder with approaching people, which I think is really important. I think, you know, younger people don't have that issue as much as the older generations. But I think probably the only other area I can think of in regards to business that we've probably made mistakes is just trying to do too much too quickly. You know, I think the slow burn, in our opinion, sort of has always given us the best long-term results. And, you know, always thinking, well, if we create this, it's going to give us a great, you know, flash in the pan, but how's the longevity of it going to be compared to, you know, doing it another way? So I was thinking, like, what's the long term? How can we get leverage off this? How can we get other people to utilize it, which is going to help us, rather than just trying to create something that's just going to be a bit of an overnight sort of sensation.
Yeah, I definitely think if it's a organic growth and it's a slower growth, then it tends to be a non-fad type business. So you definitely do see our industry it's built on fads, isn't it? So if you can kind of stay away from the fads and just be consistent with what you do, over time you'll build that real, I guess, those true fans that won't want to leave you, and you can make
100%,
and make a really successful business off that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, like, you know, a lot of our business now comes from online, and you think if you do the right things by people and your attention's good, if you launch a new program or you launch a new product, you know, why wouldn't they buy it? They've got a great connection with you. There's great rapport there. You've got the credibility. What you've done with them before has proven to work. You launch something new, you've already straight away got some sales. Where if you haven't got those, you know, got that in place, then you're constantly just trying to get more people.
Yeah, it's a very hard kind of merry-go-round to get off when you're on that one.
Yeah.
So where do you see, I guess, the tennis scene shifting to in the future?
In regards to like the game,
and then people, I guess, the training of that. Do you see any shifts that are happening?
Well, it's definitely a lot more people are shifting online. So we're working with a lot more high-end players, not necessarily like top 100 professionals, but we're working with a lot of really like top junior players around the world now online. So, you know, it's just, it just goes back to that they're used to following a screen for their training. They're used to following a screen for their online schooling, because a lot of them travel. So I think you know, our presence in that space is super strong, because we've been doing it for a long time, and we absolutely love it, because, you know, you're connecting with people from all around the world. I think the game is changing a lot. COVID's, I think, whacked a lot of sports around, but tennis has been hit hard because it's a truly international sport. It's going to be one of the last cabs off the rank to get going again, unfortunately, because they can't just run a tournament in the USA and have it as ATP event, because not everyone can go there and play it. So it could be another year, and all these tournaments obviously rely on their annual event to run to make money. And, you know, we just don't know what's going to happen with it at the moment. It's a real limbo period at the moment. There's no real talk about when it's going to be back up and running. And I think physically, people are got their heads around a lot more about what it takes to become a good player physically. And that's just because, people can go online now and they can read blogs and they can find information. And, we actually just did, I actually just did something really cool, which I spoke to you about before. It was called the Tennis Summit. So it was like an online conference. So they had top coaches and trainers from around the world. And when I got through it, I was like, mate, that is so cool. So I did a presentation on there. I just filmed it, edited it, and sent it through. And they basically just popped it up. So instead of people going to America and going to a conference for a weekend and paying accommodation, airfare, etc., they can just sit at home and watch it. But then they've got access to it lifetime. So such a good concept. And things like this are obviously changing sport in general. Because we're just getting so much more education, from diverse education as well. And it's, it's super powerful. I mean, I learned heaps out of that as well. So from the summit, from watching other coaches and trainers, and I wouldn't have been able to do that myself if it was run as an in-person sort of conference.
Cool. So this is something, I guess, that we have kind of touched base on a lot over probably the last few months. We're both kind of keen and trying to understand the whole impacts of the mental health side of things. And I guess from our businesses, how can we actually work with this mental health and try and add that to, and actually work on that as well as our training side of things. How does the mental health help drive, I guess, what you're wanting to do in your business, and then what you're planning to do in the business?
Mate, that's a great question. And it's an area in tennis that I think players like Novak Djokovic have really pioneered. So his approach over the last 10 years has been very different than the bulk of other players. So he got into meditation, yoga, breath work, and for a long time, he was the only person that would really ever talk about it. I'm talking 5-6 years of him doing it, and he would constantly mention it, and other people would touch on yoga and things, but the depth that he went to, and stuff that I saw him do, and I was like, this guy's different. And then I look at the results that he's had and the way his body's handled the wears and tears of the game, and he could play for another 10 years.
Was that when he was going through that stage when he was always pulling out of the tournaments?
Yeah. So it all started with him, I believe. I don't know him personally. I mean, I know him to say hello to, but I've never really had a conversation with him. And it started with him when I think he realised he was gluten intolerant. And people started to have a bit of a go at him, because this was before it really, the whole gluten train started going full steam. So he was one of the first athletes in the world to sort of touch on that. And he was just like, look, when I eat pasta and bread and things, I feel like crap. When I go on court and play, because generally a player would have a bowl of pasta an hour before you play or 2 hours before you play, and jump on court, and it's going to give you that, good consistent energy. But he'd walk on court and go, far out, I feel tired, I'm getting these stomach cramps. And then everyone, you need to keep doing this and doing that. So I think he realised, someone turned around and said, mate, run these tests, and realised, yep. So he changed his diet. And I think from there, he just got people around him that looked at things differently, a bit more, I guess, holistically. And at the time would have been alternative. And I think he just went with it. He just went, that makes sense. That makes sense. Like, he's at the point now where he said, I won't have a COVID, a vaccine. If it comes out, I'm not going to have it. And I don't feel I need to take it, and I'm not obligated to take it. And they've gone, holy crap, like, how are we going to get the world's #1 player to play if he's not going to have it? What do we do? So, and that's just his belief, because he doesn't believe that that's the answer. That's his opinion. And so, Novak even does things like, someone was telling me Australian Open just gone, that he would go before his matches, he'd go into the botanical gardens, which are just not far from the courts, and he'd go climb a tree and he'd sit in the tree for half an hour. When you look at that now, you think it's quite funny, right? But I love doing that stuff myself too. So he would do it just to ground himself, apparently, and he'd go and do some breathing, maybe listen to some music. He'd climb down from the tree, and all of a sudden he'd be like, I'm just playing a game. Like, it's not the be all and end all. Like, the world's huge. I surrender to it, and whatever it will be, will be. One thing how our training style has evolved is, and this is probably, we could probably add another thread into what we do now, is we could probably put in there something around, mindset and, mental health, because we do encourage and set protocols for the bulk of our players that we work with online. They vary, but in a nutshell, we get players to do some form of breath work in the morning and some form of visualization. And then they would do something similar at night. So the breathing would vary. In the morning, the breathing would be probably shorter in duration and a little bit more aggressive. And at night, it's a lot slower and a lot more rhythmical. And the visualization is more about just letting go of the day. And, in the morning, it's more about what am I focusing on for the day? What's going to hold me back? What do I need to let go of? Sort of around that space. And I think equipping young people with those capabilities, they think it's for their tennis, but it's really setting them up for life, because we hang on to so much crap that we just walk around with for a long, long time sometimes. And when we can learn to manage that effectively, then we can go back to, like I said before, focusing on what's important to us without being distracted by those things. And the mental health now, we saw what we feel a lot of players, even at the high end, struggle with a lot of mental health issues. And I know, personally, there's players even now who are in the top couple in the world that have got, stuff going on as well that they battle with. And that's all right. That's normal. Like, I think now the statistics and the data around it all show us that, most people do go in and out, and some people have stuff that's chronic their whole lives, and that's okay. And you're always going to battle with things, some people, but learning some ways to minimize it and to deal with it so you can still function and keep moving forward towards your goals is what's important.
Yeah, again, like from the outside, you put these athletes on the pedestal when you think that they are invincible and everything. But when you break it down to them and when you're dealing with an athlete, once you can detach yourself from that person is famous, he or she is just exactly the way that you are. They have the same issues. They think in a similar way.
100%.
And they have to go through all of their insecurities, through all of the limelight. Everyone's critiquing them. They're on TV. They get judged for every single action they do. Like, if everyone in society had that pressure on them, I've got to imagine the mental health rates then.
Yeah. And me personally, I've never felt that it's natural for us as humans to, like you said, be put up on pedestals like that and almost be glorified, because when you think about it, you're being glorified and admired for one thing. And, we're all a combination of thousands of things that we do and characteristics and relationships. And, it's, the people that I always would admire are people who are great role models in general. And they don't have to be successful people, but just people that, because, they are successful, in my opinion. And you would have seen rugby league players that you would have been dealing with, and you would have known that they're going through a lot of junk at a certain time, and thinking, this person's so much is weighing down on them mentally and emotionally. And then you go and watch them go out and play, and they have a great game still because they are good at that one thing, but the other parts of their life aren't going great. then you're right. Then you throw in pressure and you throw in, talking money and contracts and all that sort of thing. They're just highly susceptible to stuff going on.
I think I was talking to a coach about this today, and it's kind of advice I give to a lot of coaches that if you go into a situation where you're training an athlete and you purely just focus on the sport and you don't have any regard for who that person is, then you're going to fail very fast. Whereas if you go into it and you treat them as a person first, you try and find out what makes them tick, find out who they are, and then you coach on top of that, you're going to get a lot of trust, a lot of belief in what you do. And it's something I learned early on, and it's something I've applied throughout my coaching career, and I still do it today.
Yeah. Yeah, no, 100%, mate.
So for an aspiring coach that wanted to get into the tour or into the pro tennis world, what advice would you give them?
Oh, there'd be a bit, but I think just probably focus on where you want to end up and work back from there. I guess where I'm at in my career now, I didn't think I would be here. And I wish that if I look back now, particularly with the online business, I wish now like we set things up earlier. So if I would have had the foresight to think, where do you want to end up? How do you want your business to be looking? How do you want your family to be? How much money do you want to be generating? What sort of person do you want to be known as? And just working through areas like that and then working back from there, I think is super powerful in my opinion.
Yep.
And then just coming up with a plan to get there and then going, well, where am I at now? Like, what are my personal attributes and characteristics? What do I need to work on with there? What do I need to work on with work? And just sort of trying to pull it all together and then, put the pieces together.
Cool. And in terms of a player, what advice would you give a player who wants to, I guess, try and get into the tennis scene as well? Like, do they need to search out certain coaches, information, both?
I just think it's getting the right people around the player. That's the most important thing is, you can have a player that is good at a young age, but they're just getting through on a bit of talent. If they haven't necessarily got the right people around them, then they can struggle long term. Just due to the fact that, they're being told the wrong things, or sometimes they're told the things that they want to hear. So, having the right team around you, and that doesn't necessarily mean having the best coach or the best trainer, just means having someone that you feel can get the best out of you is, I think, the most important. Sometimes that's a matter of just trying different things and different coaches.
Cool. And last main question, what advice would you give to someone who wants to set up a business in the sporting world?
I think know your product, know what you do, know your strengths, but more importantly, know your weaknesses. And if you haven't got the capability to improve your weaknesses, then get someone to help you in that area, whether it's marketing or whatever the case. I think that's, you got to do those things. Don't think you can do everything on your own.
Yep, I definitely agree and kind of attest to that at the moment. So lastly, how can people find you?
Through our website, tennisfitness.com, and on Instagram and Facebook. If you just search for Tennis Fitness, you'll find us in there. People can shoot us an email at info@tennisfitness.com. Always happy to help out people where we can. So anyone out there, just reach out. If you want any follow-up questions after this, feel free to get in touch with me and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And look, AZ, I think it's great what you're doing and the direction you're going with your business, and not only for yourself personally, but the people you're going to impact along the way with your knowledge base. We consider you, definitely one of the best trainers we've come across. So, mate, we just really wish you the best with everything that you do. And I hope that this can help some people in some way, mate.
Well, I definitely think it will, and thanks for those kind words. I'll give you some money later on. In terms of what Marto's touched on it before, they do put a ton of information out there daily, weekly, and there's heaps of free stuff on their website. So I would recommend just going out there, getting a feel for what they do, just I guess just using some of their free stuff, and then you can kind of just go from there. But it's one of those businesses that once you kind of get in, you'll kind of will trust everything they do, and you'll kind of just be one of their true fans. So go and check it out, and I'm sure you guys will enjoy it. Nathan, Martin, thank you very much for coming on the show.
No worries, AZ. Thanks for having me.
We'll maybe do
See
round
you guys
two
soon.
See ya.
Yeah.